Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this third installment of CECAM's From Women's Eyes. My name is Sara Bonella. I am the Deputy Director here at CECAM. And so let me start by giving you a very, very quick intro to the webinar and why we're doing what we're doing, why we're meeting today. And then we'll just dive in, hopefully, for a nice conversation to be shared with our welcomed and appreciated guests, Virginie and Shobana. So in 2015, the General Assembly of the United Nations declared February 11 of every year as the International Day for Women and Girls in Science. The intent was to achieve full and equal access to and participation in science for women and girls, understanding and highlighting the points that although we have been discussing gender equality and female participation in STEM faculties, this is still an objective, not an acquired result. And so, the UN felt that it was important to encourage activities and initiatives to promote inclusion and openness in science in many different ways, but in particular on February 11, to include female participation. Now, a couple of years ago, CECAM decided that this was, a great opportunity for us to join the many initiatives that take place around the world to celebrate this day. This is a party, it's a celebration before anything else. And we decided to open this series of conversations called From Women's Eyes with female scientists in the community of simulation and modeling. So, it is my pleasure to host this session. My job will be mostly that of a moderator, and I will make sure to try to guide the discussion through a few questions. But most importantly, and here I really, really hope that I'll be able to count on the participants' help to convey also questions from the audience. Now, I should let you know that this session is being recorded. You can intervene as participants using the Q&A Zoom tool in two ways. Either you type your question or your comment, and I will share it with our panelists and with the rest of the participants, or you can ask to be invited to actually pose your question or state your comment in person, in which case I will invite you to unmute your microphone and you will be enabled to talk. So without further ado, I think, I'm quite curious, like you are, to get to know better our two guests, Virginie and Shobana. And so I would start by asking Shobana to introduce herself.
Hello, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm Shobana Narasimhan. I'm a computational material scientist or a computational condensed matter physicist. I work in the area of density functional theory, mostly applied to nanosystems. I'm a professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, which is a government-funded research institute in Bangalore, which is in the south of India. However, I have also, for many, many years now, been interested in the issue of women in science. What is it that holds back women in science? Why are there so few of us? What are the challenges we face? And what can we do to help those women in science who are facing constraints or challenges? So this is the perspective that I bring to this conversation.
And it's going to be a very interesting perspective, I am sure. Thank you, Shobana. Virginie.
Thank you, Sarah, and hi to everyone. I'm Virginie. I come from Switzerland and did my bachelor's and master's at EPFL. I'm now doing a PhD in the group of Mathieu Luisier at ETHZ, Zurich. And besides actually my research work, I'm presiding the Scientific Staff Association of the Electrical Engineering Department here, which sort of bridges a lot of topics between science and politics, where we're talking a lot about these topics of diversity as well. I've been, TAing many courses since I started my bachelor's, and noticing also some patterns that arose and that enabled conversations to start, and especially younger female students to gain confidence throughout the years. So there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that having these conversations is essential to break taboos and then help people, owning what they actually truly want to do. I'm looking forward to that conversation as well.
Thank you, Virginie. Thank you very much. So to get to know you two a bit better, maybe you could start by telling us what, attracted you towards science, and how did you make your decision to pursue a career in science?
Me?
Yes,
Or...
why don't you start?
All right, thank you. Right, I think it was quite straightforward for me. And my family has played a huge role in that. I was always told that I could ask as many questions as I wanted. And my dad has a scientific education, so that helped. And then I started maths and physics in high school and just continued naturally with sciences at EPFL. Now the question that might be more interesting here is why computational material sciences? Because I was doing a lot of experimental work before, and the question arose when I had to choose my master's, and I was actually fearing computational sciences, and I knew that was a purely emotional response. So I just thought, there's one way to go beyond it, and it's actually to get trained and to know what it actually really rationally means. And that's why I went that direction. My first contact with that field was with Professor Nicola Mazzari, and I actually really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the science into it helped develop my intuition a lot and my understanding of the theory. So this is how it started.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate very well to the, using the simulation to actually validate your understanding or even making it deeper, because, if you can explain something to a computer, then that means that you have really understood it. Shobana,
Yeah.
what about you? How did you get started as a scientist?
So the way the Indian educational system is set up, after 12th grade, so after high school, you have to choose whether you want to go into science or the arts or commerce. And it's almost taken for granted that anybody who is doing well in classes, doing well academically, chooses science. But I wasn't sure really that I wanted to do science. Sorry, I told you wrong. It's after the 10th grade you have to make the choice. And I wasn't sure because I really liked both the arts and sciences. And I particularly liked mathematics, and I liked writing and English literature. But I felt a bit shy about having these likes because my father happened to be a rather well-known mathematician and my mother was a very well-known writer. So I felt I wasn't showing so much imagination in what I liked. I was following my parents, and I also had this feeling that I didn't want to follow exactly what they did, because then I would always be identified as their daughter. However, I finally chose to take science because my reasoning was that if you were a scientist, you could keep alive an interest in the arts, but it's much harder to do it the other way around, to be an artist with an interest in the sciences. One can do it, but it's not so easy. And then when I was in the 11th or 12th grade, I think that's when I first encountered quantum mechanics, special relativity. And these were two topics that I found extremely fascinating. And that's when I just completely fell in love with physics, and I became really obsessed with physics. And after that, my path was really clear to me that I wanted to do physics. Why condensed matter? Why computation? That, I think, is I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to say it now. I went to Harvard to do my PhD, and I thought I would do either high energy physics or astrophysics, but most probably high energy physics. And I saw all the possible PhD advisors there. They were very famous. Some of them had, Nobel Prizes, but they really seemed extremely intimidating, often even unpleasant. And I couldn't see myself working with any of them, whereas the people doing condensed matter seemed much nicer. And I thought, okay, I'll do this. So I don't know if that's the right way to make a choice or the wrong way to make a choice, but it's the choice I made. And I can say that I have never regretted it. I think I'm really happy that that's the choice I made.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I think, for an institution like CCAM, the sense of community and the belonging and the ease that you feel when you're sharing science with your colleagues is very, very important. And so, it's always good to know that this is also an important part of the choices that we make. I have a follow-up question, but I would also like to tell the audience that they should feel free to, just chime in whenever they want. This is not, a first part and then second part with interaction with the audience event. So, should you have questions or comments, just feel free to share them with us whenever you want. I think that our event manager, Aude, has just instructed you also on the chat on how you can do that best. So the follow-up question was role models, because I think that this is something that as female scientists, we are confronted with or asked about often. And do you think that there was anybody in your path that really made an impression on you and made you think, oh yes, this is something I can do? I mean, Virginie, you mentioned Professor Mazzari here at EPFL, but I was just wondering, more in general, is this something that, out of the figures that we are confronted with in society, is that something that was important or interesting for either of you? Maybe Virginie, you can start here.
Sure. Yes, of course. It's just you're spending a lot less energy to fight forever you have to do if you know someone has done it before. You just know it's possible and someone has done it before. So
let me specify the question a little bit, perhaps. Was the presence or absence of female role models at a level that was not heroic? Because I mean, one thing that I am always surprised by is that when we try to encourage young girls to go into science, we talk about people like Marie Curie, right? And so I have a feeling that the hidden message is you have to be super smart and and go for 2 Nobel Prizes if you want to be a woman that goes into science. And I kind of have the impression that boys are not encouraged in the same way. I could be wrong, and so if any of our male participants wants to intervene and contradict me, I'm very happy to have a conversation on that.
I see your point. I personally never felt the pressure to excel as Marie Curie did, to have a career in science. I did see that I had, yes, a few role models that were female figures. Also a few female professors that I didn't want to reproduce the path from either. I think that what I personally saw is that if you're, it's my sensitivity again, but if you're giving everything to science, you might lose your life spark. And to me, that is also something that is very important. That is helping actually creating connections, being creative, communicate effectively. So it's not only about being 100% effective in one's work, to be able to deliver results all the time. It's also about human connections. And I think that mostly the role models I was looking up to were mostly people that, you know, I could exchange with, living people. Talking about living women professors, but they were also male professors. One question that came more and more often about women professors and role models was how do you deal with a family? You know, how if you've had kids, how do you deal with a career in kids if you also want to be present for your kids? And I think these exchanges are particularly helpful. Most of the time, the answers were, you know, it's organization, and I've been lucky, which doesn't always help, but I guess everyone needs to figure out their own path.
Shobana, would you like to?
So I had various role models, but interestingly, none of them were female, just because I think there weren't very many females around. But it never occurred to me that my gender disqualified me from being a physicist. Maybe because my mother was a strong feminist and she always brought me up to think I can do anything I want, or at least she didn't make me think gender played a role in making choices. And also, I think it's rather important that I went to a girls' school, an all-girls school, because what I hear from some friends is that at co-ed schools, they sometimes treat the boys and the girls differently. But in our school, it was all girls. It was a Catholic school run by nuns, and we were encouraged to be good at everything. So they never said, oh, you know, you're a girl, so you shouldn't do this. We were just encouraged to do everything. But at some point, as I studied further, I did encounter this attitude that I wasn't expected to do certain things because I was female. I wasn't supposed to be good at math. I wasn't supposed to be good at physics. I wasn't supposed to do better than the guys in exams. I wasn't expected to aspire to a career in physics. And that came as a huge shock to me. I never imagined that this would be a factor. And I still feel that the people who really supported me were in the role of mentors who were senior to me, were almost all men. But later on, I have to say now, as I, you know, got a faculty position, I think the support from a peer group of women was very, very important. And I have also seen that many women, young women, look to me for mentorship. So I can see that it is important to have female mentors, but I don't think I myself had any. And, you know, about your point about Marie Curie and how amazing she was, I just want to tell you a little story. So I conduct these workshops for women in physics. And a friend of mine who's a drama therapist came and conducted a session, and there were women in physics from all around the world. And afterwards, she said to me, but these women are all just amazing. They're incredible, every single one. And she said, are all physicists like this? And I told her, no, all women physicists are like this. And I mean, it was a little bit of a joke, but I also mean it seriously, because I think in many, many places, women in physics face such hurdles, so many challenges, that unless you're really very strong, very driven, very committed, you're not going to stay on. And so the women who stay on are either the ones who are very driven to start with, very good at multitasking, very good at communication, just so good in all aspects, or the ones who learned to develop those skills just to survive. That's what I feel.
Thank you, thank you. I think I'll come back to some of the points that you just made, maybe in a little while. And you know, you've both sort of highlighted what you think are the main challenges that women scientists and in particular women in our field, have to face. I was intrigued, I mean, do you think that actions and law and legislation help? Or do we need to really work even at a deeper level, or both really, which is more the cultural atmosphere, the template for, indicators that make a university choose one person over another, for example, for a faculty position? And what would you think are the priorities here? I'm sorry, let me try to make the question a little less confused, right? So first of all, we are saying that there are still hurdles that are specific to the fact that you are a woman in science. So now the first part of my question is, what should we push for? More laws, more rules, more discussion, all of the above? Virginie.
Okay, shall I go first this time?
Yes, Robin, of course, if you want.
Okay, so I can, of course, mostly only speak about the situation in India, though I'm a little bit familiar with Europe and US since I've also worked there. I think we really need both. It's important that the rules and laws are in place to ensure equity. So, for example, you have to make sure you have good maternity leave policies. You have to ensure that men and women are paid the same salaries. You have to ensure that sexual harassment is punished. All these kinds of rules have to be in place, which they aren't everywhere. Some places have them, some places don't have these rules. But just having the rules is not enough. First, like in India, I think our rules right now are really mostly very good. There are a few exceptions, but mostly the rules are excellent. But they are not enforced. Like there's a rule that every place has to have a daycare center. But nobody checks, do they really have a daycare center, or how good is the daycare center? We have rules that there's a procedure for women to complain if they are sexually harassed, and sexual harassment is a crime. But in reality, we see that most of the time, even if a woman files a complaint, usually nothing happens, even if the person is found guilty. And often it is a woman's career that takes a real hit rather than the person who is accused of being the harasser. I'm saying woman because in India, we have this peculiarity that sexual harassment is defined entirely as a crime perpetrated by a man against a woman. Of course, we all know that need not be so, but that's the way our laws are formulated. So, I mean, that, for example, is an example of a rule or law that needs to be changed. But I think, if something really horrible happens, the kind of thing that a law or a rule would take notice of, most people would agree, oh yes, this is really bad. Okay, like if an advisor tells a PhD student, if you don't sleep with me, you don't get your PhD, I think nearly everyone will be outraged and say this should be punished. But there are lots of more subtle things, small things, little discomforts, little hurdles that make life harder for any kind of minority in science. And those things, it's very hard to legislate against, but those things can also make life very hard for you if you're a minority in science.
No, yes, thank you. And this gives me the opportunity to, stress something that I think is very, very important. Today, we are focusing our conversation on women, but I totally take your points. Science is still a rather exclusive club, right? We don't see a lot of minorities represented to a level that I think would be beneficial for science. I mean, my main argument, I think, is totally trivial, but it's always that diversity leads to more ideas. We need ideas that are not all the same in any work environment, but even more so in something that requires the level of creativity and checks that our job does. And so you know, today we're talking about women, but this is, of course, also an opportunity to remember that inclusivity is not just about gender. There are a lot of other things that we should consider when we talk about these sort of items. So thank you, Shobana, for bringing up that point. Virginie, would you like to add or complement?
Yes, I really like the point of Shobana about enforcing the laws about you know, if a crime is committed, then having a framework that enables us to actually punish the people that were wrong. And that is very essential. That I know also from stories I've heard and people I've talked to that it has not always been the case for them. So this is really true. There is one thing I'd like to bring, which I feel uncomfortable with. Often it's the discussion around quotas. Should we enforce laws about having 50% women, or say a given percentage of a given minority occupying specific position? Because although I understand where it comes from and I understand what it's aiming to fight against, I feel that, you know, as a woman, if I know that I'm chosen for a specific position because there's a quota that needs to be respected, I feel like this is wrong. I would like to be chosen because of my competences and not because of what gender I have. And I think that as a student, if you see a professor of yours that doesn't feel quite right at her position because she knows that she's been chosen there because she had just slightly higher chances of being chosen as a woman than as a man. This feeling of imposter that professor might have is something I'm sure can't hide to everybody. And speaking back about role models, it is something that as students we do feel, maybe unconsciously, but we might also reproduce afterwards. And what we need to actually get rid of is this imposter syndrome students might have. So I wouldn't support quotas. I understand why they're here, but I think, and that's my personal opinion, that they might do more harm than good. And maybe one, positive message we should still, or positive view of the future we should still keep in mind is that we need to be a little bit patient, because the generations that we're educating right now have are more diverse than the ones that were here before us, and we have to wait sort of this lagging time until they also climb up the ladder and enhance diversity also. So I'm hopeful for that. Of course.
Can I say something about that? So I understand your discomfort with quotas because, I mean, for example, if a position is advertised solely for women, then any woman who gets it after that, I worry that she won't be respected as an equal by her peers, because they will say, oh, you only got that job because you're a woman. But I mean, there are a few things I want to say about that. One is that nowadays, any woman who gets a job is more or less told that you only got the job because you're a woman. I mean, even if there isn't a quota, even if there isn't a strict policy of affirmative action. And so I think, I mean, I've seen it happen to many of my colleagues, students, etc. People tend to assume that a woman gets a job because of a quota, unless, again, she's an absolute genius. I mean, there are lots of people who are good, but maybe not a genius. And when a woman like that gets a job, people say, oh, she only got it because she's a woman. Or, I mean, sometimes they go further and say, oh, she must have had an affair with this person. She's in a relationship with this person. I don't hear the same thing when men with comparable abilities get a position. The other thing is you say be patient, but I think the rate of change is so slow that unless you do a little bit of social engineering actively, things just won't change. So in India, this issue of quotas is actually rather a politically explosive one, not so much in the context of gender, but in the context of caste, because we have a caste system, and there's certain castes that were historically oppressed, and the government has in place a system of quotas and reservations for them. And people feel very strongly either for it or against it. And I can see why some people don't like it, but I can also see that if they didn't do it, then they just would be almost no students from disadvantaged backgrounds in our universities, in our government, etc. So I think it's kind of a tricky issue.
Thank you for, yes, Sarah, do you want to take a, yeah, thank you, Shavana, for raising that, these perspectives. I think is extremely interesting because you have this experience from India and other countries where you've been or other people you've met. And, you know, I also have, I have roots in Finland where we have a pronoun for women and men that doesn't make any difference. And, and it is fascinating to realize that we might talk about the same subject, but we have different perspectives on it because of where we come from. I can understand your position, especially concerning castes, that and understand how slowly it might move.
So thank you both, but let me take this opportunity to be a little provocative then, maybe Shobana. Is there a risk of going too far? I mean, are we taking also the risk that sometimes when you have, a slightly better male candidate for a job, then he doesn't get it because there is this overriding concern about, promoting gender concerns at the moment?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that I think it's very hard to qualify better in something like science. It's a very subjective thing. I mean, of course, you can say whose H index is better, who is published in journals with a greater impact factor. I mean, then you can, of course, say this one is clearly better than that. But I think most of us believe that's not what we want to do, that we feel we can judge by hearing the person talk, give a lecture, by reading their papers, by discussing with them one-on-one. And what I've seen over the years has made me feel that these judgments we make are often affected by implicit bias that we're not even aware of. Like we're judging women and men differently. I have seen this because I've been on various selection committees, and I've heard people say things about women that, oh, she doesn't seem driven, she doesn't seem creative, she doesn't seem independent. And for men, they say things like, oh, I think he has a lot of promise. I can see he's very bright. And I think these are actually not objective evaluations. They're very much affected by our prejudices that we may not even be aware that we have about how we think a woman should behave, how a man should behave. also, if we go by something like papers, we have to take into account the fact that maybe the woman had a career break to have children. So, I mean, there's so many things. But okay, even if we leave all that and we say occasionally a man may not get the job that he deserves because a woman who is slightly less good got it. I'm sure that happens sometimes. But at the same time, I mean, lots of times women don't get the jobs that they deserve because they're women. And I don't believe we're yet in a situation where one thing happens more than the other. So that's my take on it.
Got you. Thank you very much. So this sort of takes me to maybe another thing that it might be worth discussing together, which is, I mean, two things actually. The first one is that, you know, there is a lot of attention nowadays in institutions, for example, here at EPFL. You know, if you are a member of a panel or a committee to hire someone, you know, you go through training to avoid implicit or explicit bias and things like that. Are these measures effective, you think? I don't know if either of you has any experience with those, or is in the end something that is still, you know, so culturally embedded in our brains that it's difficult?
I can jump in quickly. I've been part of a selection panel as a student. I don't recall having had any training. So it had to come from only common sense, and you know, common sense can be very biased. I think, I mean, if preconceptions are things that are really hard to control, even if you're made aware of it, I think it's very, it takes time. It takes time. So certainly these measures are a good start. Making someone aware of a bias, of a cognitive bias, is already doing maybe, I don't know, I'm saying, you know, any number, 40% of the job. Definitely not 80%. But something more than 5%. So kind of a big range. But is it effective? No, I don't think it's effective.
So let me ask you something a bit more related to your experience, Virginie, because so I know that you benefited, for example, from an Inspire Fellowship proposed by the Marvel National Center for Competence and Research. Was, you know, the notion and then, you know, the fact of having access to such a tool important, relevant? Yes.
Yes, it was, because I was unable to finance my own the price of accommodation and living in Zurich. I would have stayed home otherwise, and I would have done it probably at EPFL. So just from a financial perspective, it was very helpful. And besides, of course, everything what it just helped me do afterwards, access to the community. It was knowing, creating a network that was very, very important. Yes.
So I think we're saying that, you know, both tools that enable awareness of bias, like, you know, Shobana was bringing up before, and then proactive measures, specific funding means, for example, dedicated to facilitating career moves from young female scientists. These type of things are positive tools that we should definitely try to foster.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, for me, two things. So this, being an Inspired Potential Fellow was definitely very stimulating. And also having, you know, having these role models that were truly inspiring to me, that felt, you know, I could imagine myself being at that position. It felt right. I didn't feel any sense of imposter syndrome. These were the two things that were quite important.
Thanks. So I think I have to warn the participants and our guests that if no questions pop up, I'll just keep talking myself and ask questions. So, it's very important for us to hear also from you if you want to. So Shobana, going back to what you were saying about, objective measures to, select, for example, hires in our field. Do you think that the parameters that are used, things like the impact factor or the number of publications, or I don't know, are these gender neutral? Or is there something in the things that we consider as objective, or that the community still considers as objective parameters, that should be changed?
So I don't know enough about it, but I guess that these parameters look at things like how many papers you publish, how many high impact papers you have, how many grants you've got. And I have seen statistics that say it's much harder to get a grant if you're a woman. That women tend to write fewer papers, but maybe longer papers. And so if you start quantifying stuff like that, I mean, if you just count the number of papers, then women aren't going to do very well. There was this famous study it was a paper in Nature quite some time ago. I don't know if you remember this, where they looked at people getting grants in Sweden, and they tried to do an objective evaluation, like give some points based on something. And then they compared it with what the referees were grading men and women as. And they found that if you compare a man and woman who have the same objective evaluation, like say the same number of papers, the same number of grants, the same number of prizes, whatever, the referees would rate the men much higher than the women. And so women actually had to do, according to their point system, women had to do 2.5 times better than the men to get the same evaluation from a referee. So if you look at that, it seems to say that you really should be doing an objective evaluation on a points-based system if you want the playing field to be level. But I really also hate all these metrics like H-index and stuff. So I'm a bit reluctant to say we should just switch to those, especially because those two, I think, reflect practices in the field that are probably not gender neutral. But I don't know what the answer is.
No, but I mean, I guess your comments are very interesting to me because, I see it's maybe in the way in which I think about, doing science, but also a lot of my more experienced and younger female colleagues, we sometimes share the impression that the things that are looked at focus on criteria that might need a little bit of revision. I mean, I don't know, I was very, very intrigued by this information that came from the Netherlands, for example, in which when applying for a job, you not only had to somehow try to quantify your things like the number of publications or your H-index, but there was also a lot of focus into evaluating your potential as a team leader, as a community builder, characteristics that are, again, maybe incorrectly or maybe correctly, I don't know, it's very difficult to say, but characteristics that tend to be more female in the mind of a lot of us than male, whereas, the number of papers or how many times your paper has been cited are sometimes perceived as not completely gender neutral.
Yeah.
Virginie, do you have a point of view on this? I would be curious to hear someone
I
with your experience.
have not yet published my first work. So I'm not the most familiar with the metrics yet. And I must say I haven't heard about this study in Sweden either, which seems very interesting. because it's a country that invests a lot of time into this research. And I can't say exactly yet. I don't have a fixed opinion on it. Ask me in a year from now.
I shall. Perfectly fine. I shall. So which sort of takes me back to the UN and the specific theme that they chose for this year general meeting in New York, which was, women in science leadership. In that case, there was a strong connection with the sustainability topic. But do you feel that there is something specifically, that there are some traits that are specific to female leadership, and in particular in science, that would be nice to bring more to the front? Maybe the answer is no, huh? But I'm just...
So I'm very uncomfortable with sentences where you say, women are like this and men are like this, etc. Though I do say them myself quite often, in fact. But I do think that the whole culture of science as it's practiced today has become a very macho culture. It's very much driven by competition and being the first, being the best, getting to it before the other one. And I have seen, that's a culture that makes me uncomfortable. And I've noticed that especially my female students say they don't like that aspect of it. And, even getting a paper published, it's usually such a nasty process. You get these really horrible referee reports, and then you have to fight back, and then they fight back. And so many of my students have said to me that they really like doing the science, but they hate the publishing process because of this aspect of it. And so they just want to leave science. And I'm not saying that there aren't women who are aggressive, but I feel that somehow, okay, so a lot of people seem to believe that the way science is practiced will change if more women come into science, but they also seem to believe that therefore science will suffer because they think that it is the competitiveness that drives progress. And they're worried that if it becomes less competitive, progress will slow down. I strongly disagree with this, but this is the general impression I get from people around me.
Very interesting. Virginie, would you like to?
Yes, I've been thinking a little bit about it because, it's a fact, men and women are biologically different, and they function, because they're biologically different, they do function a little bit differently. Now, if we look at, for instance, hormones, we know that we have a different hormonal balance between women and between men, and also for women, like looking at one cycle, hormone balance will be different. This affects mood, it affects behavior. So I think, of course, there would be differences. But now your environment might also shape you in a given way. If you do a lot of sports, you might expect your testosterone to increase, and thus your potential maybe aggressivity to increase. Of course, it's not as simple of a model as that, as I'm portraying right now, because there's a lot of other pathways that the body can just choose to adapt to its environment. I think that my personal opinion is that a woman, a leader, a female leader, might focus more on collaboration than on the competition. And this, if I had to explain why so, I would back it up with biology. I'd love to hear, you know, how the audience actually would react to that and what they think, because I think it's a very important conversation to have nowadays, speaking about gender issues and identification. And it's a discussion that we need to have. It's the only way to break taboos, actually, and to come up with solutions all together, because we're all together in there.
Thank you both. Super interesting. I mean, yeah, I mean, I would like to sort of take home a couple of points here, and also maybe, you know, bring my own view to this particular aspect. I mean, I think I completely agree with Shobana. I think that it's really, really dangerous to say things like, you know, women are like this, men are like this, because as Virginie also rightly pointed out, you know, today identities are much less precisely defined through stereotypical images that we may have. But also because I think that a lot of the things that we are discussing are sources of pressure and maybe unhappiness, if I may go that far, for our male colleagues. I mean, I can't believe that all my male colleague friends, you know, are eager to kill each other, to publish more than one another. And I know for a fact that some of the students I have crossed in the past.
So are you sure, Sarah?
Well, I can give you a couple of examples offline, I think, that would prove my point. But
I'm just kidding.
oh, of course, me too, me too. No, but I also think that this is very important for young men, right? I mean, if we just keep passing on the message that the only way for them to succeed is the macho component of the job, oof, that's going to create a lot of problems for them and for female in the field. I am very, very, you know, cautious about this sort of.
There seem to be some questions now.
There is. Sally Price, would you like to unmute and then just pose your question?
Yes. Do you think that the field of CCAM is more competitive and individualistic than most experimental scientists? And is there less valuing of the art of being an effective collaborator? And I'm particularly thinking of the way that there are now a lot of areas where there are very high value, effective papers where you have the computation and the experiment mixed together. Yep, you're trying to understand the science by having both the experiments and the computation. And so this aspect of whether some people in our field are so competitive that they're not valuing the ability to collaborate in the way that's needed or not.
Shobana, would you like to have a first go, and then I may?
Okay, so I don't think there's really, it's more competitive or less competitive. I think it's comparable. But I think collaboration, I mean, being competitive doesn't necessarily mean you don't collaborate. You do collaborate, but then you form these cliques who collaborate. And then you have one clique, and then there's another clique you're competing with, and this clique wants to beat that clique. That's my impression. I also think that women like to collaborate, but my experience at least has been that men are more likely to collaborate with other men than with women. I don't know if this is just my experience. I used to think that it was just me, that people don't think I'm a good scientist, so that's why they don't want to collaborate with me. But I've heard this since from other women as well. So I think there is some gender component in it as well.
Virginie,
I mean, that's not directly answering Sally's question, so maybe we should go back to her question.
So maybe I can say something, and then Virginie, if you want to chime in, feel free at any time, of course. So no, I don't think that there is something specific about the domain of computational science or simulation of modeling that makes it more individualistic than other endeavors. I think, as I have the privilege of sitting in a chair as the CCAM deputy director, where I see a lot of colleagues, coming together to actually share experiences and collaborate. I see that more and more concerns, for example, about translating ideas into effective algorithms and then community codes. This is also a thrust towards collaboration. As you said, Sally, I see more and more the interest of bringing together communities that come perhaps more from the experimental side than from the computational side. So in that sense, I wouldn't say that there is a specificity. I think that there is one datum, which is that there are less women to collaborate with around. And so this brings us back to the notion that, being in a network and being open, but again, you don't choose a woman because she's a woman. You choose a scientist because you think that he or she can bring in important contributions to the work. In that sense, I don't think that there is a specificity to simulation and modeling in that respect. No.
And I couldn't add much more because I don't have that life experience, so I can't compare both fields.
So thank you very much, Sally, for asking your questions, though. Anyone else from the participants with something that they would like to share with us? Federica Troni, shall I read the question? No, Federica, you're invited to unmute and ask the question yourself if you want.
Hi, yes, what I wanted to ask is, like, in general, I noticed that having a good work-life balance is pretty difficult in academia. And I believe that this can spread the gap between men and women, like, especially when we are like, we want to have a family, or we have like some other priorities in life that I think can happen after a certain age. Do you believe that, like, since this is something that can create in general like a toxic environment when you're working, because maybe there are people that work like, I don't know, many more hours than you do, and this in general can create an imbalance regarding the gender. Do you think that this could be an important aspect to work on, like in general, to work on indirect aspect that can affect the gender gap without addressing it directly? Thank you.
May I jump in?
Sure.
Thank you, Federica. I think that's a really, really good point. I think we should, definitely. I think we should. Why? Because first of all, it would create a better environment, and a healthy environment for everybody, regardless of who they are, where they come from. And second, we still want to do excellent science, right? And excellent science is not about sitting in front of a computer 10 hours a day and trying to be as productive as possible. You can't focus for that long time at being effective. Whereas if you take a break, I mean that, when I take a break, that's generally when the ideas come. It never comes when I'm just stubborn 4 hours straight in front of my screen and try to figure out what the problem is. It works when I'm going out, walking, thinking about it, and then suddenly the solution comes, which is not very easy to deal with, because how can you tell your colleagues, I'm just, taking a break, going out? Why would you do that? It's not very well seen in our work culture in Switzerland, especially. I don't know elsewhere. I guess in the US it's not well seen either. But I believe we can be much more effective in the end by having this proper work-life balance. Yeah. Now, how to introduce it? I don't know. Starting talking about it at least. What would be your ideas, Shobana and Sarah?
So I agree with both of you. This is extremely important. And I think it is, if I had to pick just one factor that most impacts women in science, I think this would be it. Like in India, for example, we have quite a high percentage of women doing PhDs in science. So we have like, I think something like 44% of PhDs in science go to women. And then it drops hugely. Like if you look at researchers in science who have permanent positions, it goes down to 14%. And that's because it's after the PhD that these women find partners, have children, etc. So, I mean, it's quite clear that this issue needs to be addressed, and people are trying to find different ways of dealing with it. For example, in India, the government has these grants which are specifically for women who've had a break in career to come back. But I haven't really seen anything that completely works. And of course, work-life balance is an issue not just for women, but also for men. I'm sure there are many men who would like to spend more time with their families, with their friends, with their partners. But because of this culture of science, this toxic culture, which demands that you spend almost all of your time in science, doing science, it's very difficult. I recently came across this quotation by Lawrence Bragg. He said, the way the science culture has evolved, the working scientist is like a queen bee. So the scientist has just one job, which is to do research. And then there has to be this whole hive around the scientist doing all the other things for the queen bee. And of course, it was then assumed that there would be a man doing science, and then there will be a woman, you know, cooking for him, looking after his babies, making sure that he occasionally goes out and sees a movie or reads a book or whatever. And I'm sure there are many men who don't want to lead that kind of life nowadays. And I think that whole that whole paradigm of how one does science just has to change. And I don't know how we will go about it, but I think it really has to change.
So as usual, you know, the main point of this kind of conversations is to raise more questions than the number of answers that we can provide. I mean, I think something that has transpired across all the topics that we have touched is that there are items that are, you know, there are actions that have to do with legislation, creating infrastructure to support, you know, female and male scientists who want to have a family and so on and so forth. And then there is a cultural dimension to the conversation that also needs to be part of the discussion. And this is probably something that takes longer. Now we have Lydia Fabre-Quattropiani who has a comment. Lydia, would you like to share that with us?
Yes. So I was thinking that if we want to change the rules in the way of doing science, someone has to start, and how is it possible? So, and in Switzerland there is an initiative called Better Science that is thinking on this, but again, I don't know how is it possible to start so that it becomes more common to maybe work a bit less, but better.
So thank you,
Or
Lydia. We
maybe
will
not bad, but
yes. And so thank you very much. We will share the link that you sent us on the webpage for this conversation afterwards, so people can go back and have a look at it. You know, yeah, so as always, I know answers, no sure ways. I think it's important for all of us to always keep in mind that we are, in some sense, ambassadors of the way we think, you know, we can improve things. So, you know, being active, being proactive, by, you know, example is also something that is very, very important. And maybe insisting on the message that there is no single way of doing things. Diversity in all its nuances is really, you know, the best hope, I think, for science to continue to progress. And we could, you know, maybe broaden the scope of this statement even further, because if we look around us, I mean, I just think that a lot of the problems that we are facing as a society have to deal with the fact that we feel what's different as a threat and not as a resource, which is, of course, a big, big problem. Now, I don't want to cut the conversation because it's always so interesting, but we have now reached more or less our time limit. So let me just, you know, thank again Virginie and Shobana for sharing their thoughts and their, you know, experiences with us on this topic, which I think is still very, very relevant. We will try to continue these conversations also in the future, but, you know, let's keep these topics in mind every day and act on them. Any final words, Shobana and Virginie?
No, but I do want to say that I think things are getting a little better. So we shouldn't, it isn't all doom and gloom. But thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Virginie. I enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you very much, both of you. I did too, and I think it's. I thank you also for giving that space to these conversations to enable also different opinions that might converge, that do not converge 100% as well, because this is also part of diversity, right? And in the end, I think that as long as we can listen to one another and then work together, there's no reason why it wouldn't work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to the participants and the people who have asked questions online. And, you know, see you next year.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.